Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best. I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Episode 130 of the Last Round Podcast. Thanks again for joining us this week, guys, whether you're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Boxing Social, Geo7. I hope I'm saying that right. I say it every single week. Hopefully our fans over there in India's market aren't upset at us for my mispronunciation, but I think I'm saying it right. But wherever you're at, however you're listening, we definitely appreciate it. Coming off, it's actually this Saturday is a big fight. Undisputed 140-pound world title fight between Josh Taylor and Jose Ramirez. But as we just talked about before we started recording here, the recent news in the heavyweight division seems to be taking the spotlight away from that significant fight.
You're talking about Manuel Charr beating Lovejoy?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm glad you beat me to it, Mike. I'm glad you beat me to it. But we'll obviously touch on that as we go forward and do our usual reviews and previews of the fights in the boxing world. But before we kind of move forward, we have another special guest this week here on the Last Round. He's a sports and entertainment attorney, and he's currently a part of the Ring City USA boxing team. He's represented clients in boxing for over the past 20 years. Some current and former clients include Corey Spinks, Paulie Malignaggi, Peter Quillen, Luis Collazo, Sam Solomon, Kermit Cintron, Peter Manfredo, Dimitri Salita, and others. He has a long list. He's been in the boxing game for a long time. I'm sure he's seen a lot of stuff in this crazy sport we call boxing. Kurt Emhoff joins us this week on the Last Round. Thank you so much for joining us, Kurt.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I love your podcast, man. I'm a big fan.
We appreciate it. So, before, obviously, a lot of people want to hear your take, especially from the legal perspective, on this whole Wilder Fury arbitration and then Anthony Joshua, this whole heavyweight situation, if you will. But before we kind of jump into the whole details behind that situation, we kind of wanted to start on your background in the boxing world, how you came into the boxing world, and were you always drawn to sports and entertainment? And now that you're with Ring City, obviously, how did you come to be currently with Ring City as well?
Okay. Well, geez, how far back do you want to go? I mean,
whatever you want.
Yeah, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. I grew up in a town called Erie, Pennsylvania, which is like the third largest city in Pennsylvania, but it goes Philly, Pittsburgh, and then Erie. Erie's, much smaller than those two. But if you know anything about Western Pennsylvania, it's very sports oriented. It's sports crazy. So many great athletes have come, especially in the sport of football, have come out of Western PA. So I grew up in that atmosphere. Always loved boxing. From the first fight I saw when I was 4 years old, I remember watching Smokin' Joe Frazier, who was a Philly heavyweight, defending his title against Terry Daniels. It was part of Super Bowl weekend. It was on national TV, and just the name Smokin' Joe Frazier kind of lit up my imagination. And then I saw him fight, and he totally exceeded expectations. He just destroyed Daniels. So from that point on, I was a fan. I mean, I messed around a little bit with boxing, as a boxer, as a young teenager when I was like 13, 14. But Erie didn't have a lot of great trainers or gyms, so it was kind of catch as catch can. But I always loved the sport. Once I realized I wasn't going to be Sugar Ray Leonard, I decided, maybe I should focus on the books. So ended up going to law school. And while I was here in New York, during law school, I was taking a boxing class at Crunch Gym. And the person teaching it was Terry Sutherland, who because I was such a total boxing nerd and had won the Ring Magazine trivia championship when I was in college. They had a weekly trivia championship, and I won it the one week. But so I knew who Terry was. I knew who he'd fought, and he was just like, man, he's like, you know a lot about boxing. He's like, and you're in law school. He's like, my career's kind of winding down. I was thinking about getting into management. You think you could help me? It's just like, yeah, I'd love to help you. So that's kind of how I got started in managing fighters. And from there, really, I was just kind of managing a few local guys in New York. And then I discovered the internet, and I started writing for a site called Boxing Press, which turned into Seconds Out, which I don't even know if Seconds Out is still around. But at the time, there weren't that many boxing sites. So writing for a site was a big deal. So I started writing, and I wrote an article about Don King, and it caught the eye of a Don King fighter by the name of Teron Millette, and he basically asked me to represent him. And from that point on, I started getting, more high-profile, world-class clients. So that's kind of how I got my start in the game.
And you're with Ring City at the moment. How did you come to be on Ring City's team?
Again, for anyone out there, you want to get into the sport, like I said, my entry into kind of big time boxing was because I started writing for a website. Basically, people kind of didn't know who I was. I was kind of a behind the scenes guy. And then I started doing my podcast Doug Fisher is a friend of mine, old friend from Press Row. And, he liked my podcast. So I started doing it for Ring, and, the distribution got pretty big, and people just heard the podcast who started Ring City, and they were just like, man, we need to hire that guy. And also it helped that they had gotten a hold of Evan Rutkowski, and Evan and I were friends basically through podcasting. And so they brought me on. And I can't even remember when it was, but it was probably sometime in late 2019, maybe.
Right.
So,
well, we're glad you're still going in the boxing game, because we know how brutal this sport can be to people. So we're glad you're still pushing through it. But obviously, as the topic that all of our listeners want us to touch on is the big news between Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury's, previous contract. Recently, an independent arbitrator ruled in favor of Deontay Wilder that he is due a third fight with Tyson Fury, and Tyson Fury, obviously the last few months or so, has been negotiating with Anthony Joshua of Matchroom Boxing and Eddie Hearn. And then, as recently as, I believe, Sunday, the day before the Wilder decision, that Tyson Fury, I think, went on his social media and announced that, that it was going forward in August or something. So people, got very excited. Oh, we're going to get unification in Saudi Arabia, big fight. And then, less than 24 hours later, we get hit with this news of the independent arbitrator, rules in Deontay Wilder's favor. So now that throws a wrench in the whole situation. If you can kind of start from, if we know you've probably seen many contracts over the years in the boxing world. Generally speaking, what's your take on boxing contracts and especially of fights of this magnitude? Do you have any insight on the contracts between Tyson Fury and Wilder, or at least from what you read over, the last year or two?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I haven't seen any of the specific contracts that these guys might have signed. I basically know as much as you do, having read it in the media. But yeah, it seems like, in boxing, if you're a champion and you're not defending against a mandatory, especially if you're a champion who has some stature, it's almost like obligatory that you get a rematch clause in there, that you extract, like a rematch, just in case you lose the title. We've seen that especially lately, there's just been a ton of these rematch clauses. You had, Jojo Diaz and Farmer and obviously Fury and Wilder and Joshua and Ruiz. That's just kind of par for the course with the sport. It's interesting. Tyson Fury kind of came back out of retirement and out of, people didn't really expect much when he first fought Wilder, and it was such a good fight. But I think what also was at play was you had, the whole Wilder-Joshua negotiations going on, and they just became really acrimonious. So if you remember, around the time of the first Joshua-Ruiz fight, Wilder, I think, had just beaten Brazil, and he didn't just announce that he was going to fight Ortiz next. He announced his next 3 fights, which is like unheard of, right? And I think all that sprung out of the negotiations between Joshua and Wilder becoming acrimonious, because basically they were playing keep away with Wilder from Joshua, just like, oh, you don't want to give us 50-50? Well, guess what? We're not going to fight you for at least the next year and a half or so. So they planned 3 fights ahead. And obviously one of the deals they made was a 2-fight deal with Tyson Fury. And what's interesting was that, Tyson, then, they were supposed to fight a rematch with Tyson Fury the first time around, and then he kind of split, and it would be interesting to see that contract, that he was just able to ghost them on that one and giving him a rematch. But obviously they must have made this second contract where there was a rematch clause a lot more airtight. So, and again, I don't have the specifics of this, but one thing I do know is that, the arbitrator who they went in front of, Daniel Weinstein, is a really experienced arbitrator. He's not some fly-by-night guy. He's been doing this for many years. And in fact, the organization he's with, JAMS, was like one of the, along with AAA, was like one of the first, prominent organizations in arbitration and mediation services. And I think Weinstein was one of the founders of it. So he's been doing this for a long time. He's also presided over a bunch of cases that Top Rank has had. Top Rank and Golden Boy had a big dispute over Manny Pacquiao many years ago. I don't know if you remember that, where Golden Boy gave him the suitcase full of cash and tried to steal him away from Top Rank. And so Weinstein, kind of presided over that. I don't know if it was a mediation or an arbitration, but eventually that one settled out, where Top Rank got the promotional rights and Golden Boy got a percentage. And then he also presided over a case with Nonito Donaire, again, where there was a dispute between Top Rank and Golden Boy, and Golden Boy's contract got voided and Top Rank won. So it's funny to hear Bob Arum, belly aching about Weinstein, because, Weinstein's found in his favor a bunch of times. It's kind of his go-to guy when it comes to arbitration. But the one thing I did, listen, I haven't seen the decision, so I really can't, intelligently comment on the specifics of it. But the one thing I did see, Dan Raphael had spoken to someone, and apparently the case law that was relied upon by Wilder's side was the Lennox Lewis versus Hasim Rahman case, which, if you're going to have a comparative case in boxing, that's certainly it, where a fighter loses his title. He's a veteran fighter, he's in his mid-30s. There's a rematch clause, and the guy who won the fight, who owes the rematch, is trying to duck out on it and fight somebody else. So, apparently, and again, I have not seen the decision, but just from Dan's article, apparently Weinstein relied on that case in deciding this one, where, the age of Wilder, he's getting on, he's not going to get too many opportunities, he could potentially get frozen out of the picture, which was Lennox Lewis's argument. Swayed him that, Wilder needs to get this rematch. He's got a valid contract, and, he deserves to get the rematch. That's from Dan's article, and that's all I'm going off of. That seemed to be the reasoning, was that there was a comparable case with Lennox. He found the contract solid. Apparently, obviously, COVID played a part too in tolling the term of it. So there you go. So Wilder won it, and it's I think it was binding arbitration. So Top Rank doesn't have many grounds at all to appeal it. So they're stuck with it.
You mentioned, the obviously the COVID and the pandemic probably told it, so it kind of extended the timeline, because towards the latter half of 2020, Tyson Fury and his team, and I believe at some point Top Rank had said there was a deadline for Wilder to fight it, in a sense, and it came and went, and then they kind of celebrated like, hey, the deadline passed, we're going to move on. But I think we talked about it on the show in a past episode around that time that, since there was a pandemic, kind of unprecedented in our lifetime, did that have anything to do with the timeline? Could it have extended it like you mentioned? I mean, is that realistic to say that the pandemic extended that timeline and Wilder and his team knew it, so they just kind of waited in the shadows until it was their turn?
I mean, I don't know that they waited in the shadows. I mean, I don't know all the specifics of it. I know they were kind of, I mean, it just, again, from what I'm hearing and what I heard in the media, it seemed like they were pursuing it. It just, they were trying to make it. I remember in December, they had talked about doing it, and it didn't, I guess they had a date, but it came up against a number of other sporting events. So they decided that wasn't the best date to do it on. So, I mean, there were a number of kind of excuses. So again, I mean, I'd have to look at the parties' briefs and the decision to really know how much that played into Weinstein's opinion. But I don't think there's any question that COVID obviously pushed it back, So I'm sure it definitely did play a part in the decision.
Have you ever been a part of anything of similar nature, Kurt, in regards to this whole situation, whether it was on a similar scale or a little bit less?
Like with a rematch clause?
I mean, yeah, that or arbitration, maybe anything similar to the details of this whole situation.
I mean, as an attorney, outside of the sport of boxing, yes. I mean, probably the biggest, boxing dispute that I was in was, Corey Spinks, Ricardo Mayorga basically appealed the decision of the Corey Spinks fight, saying that, Corey actually had been knocked down and the referee missed it and this and that. But that only went to the athletic commission. It didn't go before an arbitrator. But again, it was like an administrative panel, and you had to present your arguments in any written like exhibit, or if you had exhibits, you had to present those. But this is obviously a more formal procedure. It's arbitration. I mean, it's not as formal as going to federal court, or the rules of discovery are a little more relaxed. It's different rules, but still, it's pretty formal procedure where there is discovery, and there's they're going to submit briefs arguing their case and so on. I mean, I don't know how much oral argument was done. I mean, I'm sure there was, presenting witnesses and this and that, but I really don't know. I mean, it's one of those things that's confidential, so we don't know the extent to which this went on. But no, I mean, I have an idea of how arbitrations work and so on. So it seems like it was not the most complicated case, but at the same time, I'm sure there was a lot of brief writing and witnesses and so on that went into it.
From your experience, is there a chance that Fury's team could just appeal the decision, set it back several months, and manage to fit in at least one or two of the Joshua fights?
If he doesn't want to, I mean, appealing it is going to be very, very difficult, because binding arbitration, I mean, there's only certain, judicial misconduct or fraud, or I mean, you really have to have specific, pretty egregious grounds for overturning it. So, and an appeal is a real long shot with arbitration, binding arbitration. So I think he's pretty much down to. I mean, Wilder has tremendous leverage right now with this court order. I mean, he can force an immediate third fight, or he can negotiate a really lucrative step aside thing because there's and to me that's really the intrigue here, right? I mean, I think Wilder has the hammer. Like, he could force the third fight. I mean, Tyson can try and fight Joshua and make Wilder avail himself of the courts in Saudi Arabia. I mean, they could try and do that, but that could really get messy too. And I don't know that the parties want to spend a ton of money, any more money on litigation and have those headaches. I think right now, honestly, Wilder has tremendous leverage with this arbitration order.
Okay, if Fury just ignored it, went and fought, Anthony Joshua, what sort of penalties are we looking at? Because I think it was Dan Rafael or Kevin Aioli was putting something, he'd be banned from fighting in the US, and do you know what would be the usual punishment for if he just ignored it?
Well, I mean, it's a civil case, but I mean, if he's ignoring it, they could go to court to get them to enforce the order, which would probably make it very difficult for Fury to fight here in the U.S. But I mean, going to Saudi Arabia, I mean, I don't know. I think I'm not completely sure of every legal step, but he'd need to get Wilder could try and get the U.S. courts to enforce it, and then he would have to try and go over to the Saudi Arabia and get some sort of comedy from the Saudi courts to recognize the judgment, which be a massive pain in the ass. But then Fury would also have to hire some lawyers over there, so you could have a big court fight over in Saudi Arabia. So it's not something that's just going to go away, and I don't think Wilder's just going to go away with this. I mean, I think they'd be prepared to go to the fullest extent of the law in whatever country it was to try and enforce the judgment.
Okay, I forgot to check. I was going to check because I read a message yesterday on Twitter where obviously there was a contract, and the fight didn't go through, and now they're kind of forcing Tyson to fight Wilder for the third time, even though it was agreed. Somebody posted something about, isn't that a violation of the Muhammad Ali Act?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, they entered into a contract. I mean, Tyson was in breach of the contract and he agreed to a rematch. So, I don't know what provision of the Ali Act they're saying has been breached here. I mean, there's nothing in the Ali Act that says you can't have a rematch clause. Well,
I think in terms of the pretty much forcing Tyson to fight him, I think that's the way that they're looking at it.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you can't physically force a guy to fight, but I would think that Tyson would have to give up the title or something would have to happen, I mean, basically, yeah, I mean, with the Rockman case, the judge basically said to Rockman, you either fight Lewis in a rematch or you don't fight for 18 months. So I don't know if Weinstein put something like that in there because, again, yeah, I mean, you can't put a gun to someone's head and force them to get into the ring, right? But they can set out some sort of penalty or some probationary period where if Tyson does not fight Wilder, maybe he would have to at least in the States stay out of the ring for 18 months. Because that's what the judge proposed, or that's what the order that came down in the Rockman fight. So, basically, Rockman was just like, I'm not sitting out 18 months. I may as well fight Lewis. So with arbitration, it's not like civil litigation or litigation in federal court where those decisions are usually available to the public. Arbitrations are kept confidential. Unless the parties agree to release the decisions to the press, it's between the parties. You generally don't see the actual decision. So I don't know the actual specifics of it. But I know if he was relying on the Lewis decision, there might be some sort of like time penalty in there where, at least, in the states where, it'd be easier to enforce that they put some sort of, penalty on Tyson, where he would have to stay out of the ring for 18 months, because that's how it went down in the Lewis Rockman case.
A question that some listeners, we had messaged a couple people saying that you were coming on, and they sent us a couple tweets that happened actually, I believe sometime yesterday, between Kevin Iole of Yahoo Sports and Mike Coppinger of The Athletic. So they kind of had differing opinions. Kevin Iole said that if Fury ignored the decision of the binding arbitration, that he could face contempt of court charges or other penalties, and that could lead him, and I'm quoting him here, and that could lead him to not being allowed into the country. So he should not blow off a U.S. court ruling like it didn't matter, unquote. And then Mike Coppinger responded to Kevin Iole and said, this was not a court ruling. It's a binding ruling by an independent arbitrator. How can he be held in contempt of court and denied entry? Nonsense, unquote. What's your take? What's your take on both of those? I guess tweets, both of those statements between Kevin Iole and Mike Coppinger, and who's right?
Well, I'm not an immigration attorney, so I don't know about getting back into the country. That's a question that's maybe a little outside the expertise of a boxing lawyer. But like I said, I mean, as far as getting, you can get, yes, it is, like an arbitrator doesn't have a whole lot of power. He's just deciding the rights of the parties have agreed to go before the arbitrator, and he decides the rights of those parties. He doesn't have the rights of like a judge, to have jurisdiction over things. But with the National Arbitration Act, I believe they can just go to a court and have a court enforce whatever ruling the arbitrator made. So like I said, again, in the States, Tyson is going to have problems. I mean, he's going to have to deal with this ruling. If he goes overseas, like I said, Wilder would probably have to try and, get that ruling enforced in another country. And that's always very tricky. It's a pain in the butt. Yeah, I mean, I as far as whether Tyson would be allowed back in the country, yeah, that I'm not sure of. I mean, I'll be honest. I don't think that's the case, but I would have to do research on that one.
What about the contempt of court issue? Like you mentioned, they could technically take it to a court and have them enforce the decision. Could contempt of court possibly arise from that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, if he's blowing off a court order and going overseas, yeah, he's violating a court order. He's definitely gonna have to suffer some consequences for that. So there's definitely incentive for Tyson not to blow off this order. He wants to come back to the States and fight, which I would assume he would, following a Joshua fight. That it doesn't behoove him to blow off the court order.
Do you think that, and this is just more like a general question, in terms of being in the boxing business for so many years, but Eddie Hearn's obviously been negotiating this fight for a while on behalf of Matchroom and Anthony Joshua, negotiating with Tyson Fury and his team and Top Rank, and he has said in the video interview he released, I believe today or sometime yesterday, kind of giving his reaction to this whole situation in the recent news, he had said that Top Rank had told him it wouldn't be an issue in the prior months, kind of leading him on to believe that he can just continue to negotiate and get this fight over the finish line. I mean, do you think that maybe Top Rank kind of knew some information that they didn't share with Eddie Hearn about this whole date of this arbitration?
I don't know. My whole thing on this is, I can't imagine that it took as long as it did to get this fight done. I think all the parties were very aware of this arbitration, and they knew not to formally announce the fight or say that it was a done deal until this arbitration was over, because, now you're subjecting, Joshua or to maybe tortiously interfering with this rematch clause and all that. So, enticing, Fury to breach that contract. So I think they've all been very well aware of this arbitration. That's why they haven't announced the fight formally. That's why they've never completely said it's a done deal or say, oh, it's signed, we're doing a formal press conference. They've always known that this was a possibility. So, I don't doubt that maybe Arum told them it's not going to be a big deal. But I think, Eddie is savvy enough and Bob is savvy enough that the reason that fight did not get announced and it was never formally said that it was a done deal was because of this arbitration in the background. So I don't think there was any sabotage or anything like that. I don't think Eddie's going to be, I don't know what Eddie's going to do, but I'd be surprised if he brings some sort of suit to say that, he was, Arum misled him or, committed fraud with this. I mean, it sucks, he's done a lot of work and, both sides were trying to get this done, but, it sets up what's going to be really interesting. Although, from most accounts, it sounds like Wilder's team is just saying, no, we're going to do the Fury fight, but you've got, the case for and the case against taking step aside money, and I think those are really interesting, both sides of it. I think Al and Shelley, will at least listen to a step aside offer, I know that the sentiment seems to be that, they're just going to go straight into it, but I think that, I think there's many reasons for them to not take it though too. You figure Fury has already skipped out on a rematch clause before, so they obviously don't want to delay the fight at all, and who knows, if Fury loses, you got to provide for that contingency, so you've got to kind of hook Joshua into this deal. Mm-hmm. If you're going to do a step aside, and obviously what complicates that is, there's no love lost between Wilder's side and Joshua's side. The whole Shelley and Eddie thing with the Shirley Winkle stuff. I think that really pissed Shelley off and really turned him off on doing business with these guys. So the fact that they'd have to get Joshua's assent, it's complicated. It's complicated. And Deontay probably just wants revenge on Fury. So, he's going to want to go to this fight. And again, just going back to the whole acrimony between Wilder's side and Joshua's side. It's another chance for Shelley and Team Wilder to screw Joshua.
Right.
You've got this huge pot of money sitting in the Middle East for Fury and Joshua, and for Wilder to be able to step in and take that away and fight Fury. They can't be unhappy about that. But I don't know. The case to take the step aside money though, it's like, listen, no one really wants to see Fury Wilder 3, right? The last fight was a blowout. Mark Breland mercifully stopped that fight. It just seemed to decide who the better fighter was. So, and not only that, I don't know if you guys saw the tweet from Bruce Trampler, if you're following things on Twitter, but basically he was saying if Bruce is to be believed, and Bruce is a very credible, old school guy, he said even though it did like a gate of 19 million, they still lost money because the pay-per-view sales didn't hit what they thought they would. He said it was due to piracy, but what did it do, like about 800 or something, and they promoted the hell out of that. They put it on like the Super Bowl commercial, and they promoted the hell out of it, and people just didn't buy it. And that was considered a really competitive fight, coming off the draw. Now you had a one-sided rematch. Like, is that fight really going to do well? Who knows? And you'd think that Wilder's people would take step aside just to give him more time to work with Malik Scott too. They seem to be, that's his new trainer. They seem to be doing good work together. Obviously all of Wilder's flaws were exposed by Fury in that second fight. You think he'd want to work on a bunch of things. But to me, I mean, it all comes down to money, right? And I mean, Frank Warren's already thrown out there. I read it on Boxing Scene today. He's like, well, I hope that Wilder doesn't ask for $20 million. You know? Like, Deontay, $20 million, you know? I mean, that's a lot. That's an astronomical amount of money for step-aside money. And what you have to think with that, too, just from the business side of it, is you get two bites at the apple. If they're willing to pay you $20 million to step aside, there's no risk in taking that $20 million. And Fury and Joshua fight each other. The winner of that fight, it's going to be a massive, massive fight. If Wilder fights the winner of that fight, it's going to be absolutely massive. And you get a second huge payday. You know, if you just go through with the Fury fight, you're going to be the underdog. You just, you know, you got like shut out and beat to hell in the last fight. Like, you're taking a huge risk for a fight that may not even be as lucrative as that second fight was on pay-per-view. So just from a business aspect, it makes more sense to do the step aside, but I also understand, listen, Deontay is a very prideful guy. You know, he feels like, you know, Breland screwed him and, you know, he still could have won that fight. And, you know, he's come from behind before and, you know, it's the only loss on his record. So, you know, I mean, he's determined to take the rematch. So to me, that's the real intrigue, right? You know, it's like, you know, Hearn has already given them by the end of the week, right, to straighten it out. So there's a lot of pressure, you know, on Arum or Frank Warren or whoever is going to lead the negotiation to try and get Deontay to take some steps aside. But I mean, putting it out there, $20 million. I mean,
right.
Whoa, you got to at least consider that. You got to think about it. You know,
you should take it.
Well, listen, I mean, to me, it would make sense to do that. And obviously, most boxing fans really want to see Fury Joshua. But, you know, again, there's complicating factors. I mean, and Wilder has the hammer. He's got the leverage right now. He's got that court decision. Like, he can make Fury fight him. And, you know, Arum has already said publicly that, we'll just beat him again and fight Joshua later in the year. I mean, he knows that you can't really appeal it. And if you try and run away from it and fight in another country, you're going to be fighting a legal battle over there, which you may not win. And, you know, it's just, it would be a massive mess. I think, you know, if Wilder really doesn't want to take step aside money, I think you're going to see Fury Wilder 3.
Kurt, you mentioned that if, for example, Wilder takes a step aside money and lets Fury Joshua go forward, that realistically speaking, they would have to kind of loop Anthony Joshua into the whole agreement, because if Fury ends up losing, then, you know, what happens to that agreement that was actually between Wilder and Fury? But I mean, like, let's just say they don't loop Anthony Joshua in. If he takes a step aside money, he just thinks, okay, well, I just have confidence that Fury's going to win. I'm going to get my third fight. You know, then what happens? Is that contract like voided? Because I'm assuming is it common to have language in a contract between fighters, you know, of that nature, saying, oh, okay, well, this fight between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder will be for the WBC and Ring Magazine titles, because, you know, if Fury would end up losing to Joshua, he no longer has those titles. You know, with a minor detail like that in a legal contract like that between fighters kind of void the whole agreement, you know, between a third fight between a Fury and Wilder, if they still wanted to fight?
I mean, I think in order to negotiate the step aside, they're going to have to come up with a completely new agreement that amends the rematch agreement. So I don't think, and obviously they both got really experienced teams. So, you know, I would assume that Al and Shelley, with all the years of experience, they're going to make any step aside agreement be as airtight as possible. So, you know, to me, they have to include Joshua, because if Fury loses, I mean, yeah, you can still fight Fury, but obviously it's not going to mean as much, and it means a lot more for, to me, it would make sense for Wilder to, obviously to fight for all the belts, that's how it's got to be. And I mean, much as there's acrimony between the parties, I mean, Joshua too would be pretty incentivized to actually loop in on the agreement, because if he doesn't fight Fury, he's got to fight Usyk. And I mean, maybe he's really confident he can beat Usyk, but I'm not. I mean, he'd be foolish to think that. I mean, Usyk is probably, he's small, but he's extremely skilled. And, that's a dangerous, dangerous fight. And that could totally upset the apple cart in that big pile of money in Saudi Arabia. So, everyone, like Joshua and Fury are just very, very incentivized to fight. There's like so much money there and there's so much risk. Listen, Wilder could knock out Fury too. That's absolutely not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, he could still crack. So, I think certainly Fury and Joshua are very motivated to make a step aside deal with Wilder. And if Wilder does it right, he's got to loop in Joshua and he's got to make it as airtight as possible, that the winner of that fight, or if there's a draw in the fight, or, whatever, you take care of every contingency you can think of in that agreement, but you make it as airtight as possible and make sure that Wilder's protected and you make sure he gets paid a ton of money.
Right.
I mean, my thinking was, if the numbers were comparable to, Fury for Wilder, like whatever guarantee he got for that second fight with Fury, like if they could come up with a comparable number to that, so that he's not losing anything by, financially by allowing those guys to fight, that it would be a big incentive. But Frank Warren floating that 20 mil, if that's for real. I mean, it is Frank Warren, but that's in the neighborhood. You got to think about that. You got to think about that number if 20 million's on the table.
It's going to be funny if Wilder does take step aside money, because he's got into court campaigning for the fight, same as Lennox Lewis saying, I'm not getting any younger. And then he goes out and says, actually, I'll take some step aside money and I'll wait 6 months to a year.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to. I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, it's another contingency. I mean, you would want the fight by the end of 2021, but again, you're taking a chance. I mean, what happens if Fury or Joshua wins the fight and they break both their hands or something, so that they're out for a long time? I mean, either way, you're taking chances. I mean, you kind of, you roll your dice, you take your chances. But yeah, I mean, it's risk. You're taking a risk either way, and you got to think about it. But to my mind, I'd rather have 2 bites at the apple than one.
My final question on this topic, Kurt, for you, hypothetically speaking, if you were involved on one of their teams, whether it's Fury's or Wilder's, with your legal experience and your legal background, would you advise one or the other just to make a Wilder Fury 3 and then put Joshua waiting in the wings, just because like the appeal process is just too much of a hassle, too much of a headache? Or what would you advise, if you were involved hypothetically?
Well, like I said, I mean, if I'm on the Fury side of it, I'm seeing all that money in Saudi Arabia waiting for me, and I'm just like, I'm going to try and make a deal, but I also know that Wilder has a ton of leverage with this arbitration order. So, it's going to cost a lot of money if there's going to be step aside. And again, like I said, Alan Shelley would be crazy not to listen if the opening salvo is 20 million. You'd be crazy to not listen. But yeah, I mean, if it comes down to, if I'm on Fury's side and Wilder is insisting on the third fight, I mean, I think the legal options for Team Fury are very limited, and I think I don't think it's really an option to try and skip out on it and just do the fight in Saudi Arabia. I think you're going to be in a mess of legal trouble. and be tied up in court, possibly in Saudi Arabia, which I'm sure the people the money behind this in Saudi Arabia would not be happy about that. But again, I don't know the Saudi Arabia courts. I mean, who knows? Maybe it's the Wild West. I don't know. But it seems like Bob has already thought about things. He's saying, at least in the press, that they're just going to go to the Wilder fight. But yeah, if I'm on Fury's side, I am trying like hell to get them to take step aside money. And if I'm on Wilder's side, I'm at least listening. I'm listening to what they have to offer and weighing the options. Wilder's talked about generational wealth and how he wants to acquire it. Getting 2 bites at the apple would give him considerable wealth. I mean, again, like I said, it's, if you're on Team Wilder, you're not going to say, damn, Tyson tore his ass up in that second fight. Do we really want to just take the third fight if we've got an offer for potentially 2 fights? They definitely got to consider it. But, at least from appearances, with a day to think about it, it seems like they're headed towards Fury Wilder 3, but we'll see. It'll be interesting.
Right. Yeah. That's definitely we want to say we're surprised in the sport of boxing for something like this to happen, but I guess we're really not. Crazier things have happened. This just adds to that crazy list in the years of boxing, of course. Moving on to our normal parts of the show and our fight reviews. This past Saturday, the 15th of May, from the Dignity Health Sports Park in Carson, California, out here in the Los Angeles area, Brandon Figueroa gets the 7th round knockout over Joshua-Usyk. Figueroa becomes the WBC and WBA super bantamweight champion. Kurt, did you catch this fight? And if you did, what'd you think of it?
It's funny. I love this weight division, and it's the PBC has done a really great job of kind of very quietly acquiring a lot of the big pieces in this division. So they can really make some great fights. I've always been a fan of the Figueroa brothers, and I know there's a lot of people on boxing Twitter who, certainly Omar, people couldn't stand him, but those guys, they always come to the fight. They're never in a boring fight. Brandon, is just so huge at 122, and he's a beast. He is willing to eat a couple shots to put it on you. And Nery is a little disappointing to me. When I saw him at bantamweight, I thought he was really going to be special, and I was really hoping for him and Inouye to fight. I thought that would have been a tremendous fight, like a year or two ago. But Nery, yeah, I mean, listen, I can't speak for him. Maybe he got a rib cracked. I don't know what the medical diagnosis was, but yeah, it was a good fight while it lasted. Real action fight. But it just seems like Nery's style is to fight in spurts and to kind of ambush people with 7, 8, 9 punch combinations. And Brandon was just smothering him, just making him fight 3 minutes around and just wore him out and got him with a body shot. Tremendous fight, and an upset for Brandon, and puts him in line for another big payday. So it's a big win for Brandon Figueroa.
Mike, what'd you think of the matchup?
I thought it was a good matchup. Obviously, going in, I think we said that Joshua-Nery, it really just depended how he'd done the weight, because that was one of the problems that he always had. I thought it was an outstanding performance, really, from Figueroa after a couple of fights ago when he fought Julio Cesar. When he had the split decision. I kind of wondered whether, we'd all kind of overrated him, but ever since then, he beat Damian Vasquez, and then obviously now probably a coming out party against Joshua-Nery, and a great fight that they kind of agreed straight afterwards against Stephen Fulton coming up. That's going to be a real boxers fight in that one. Stephen Fulton doesn't have much power, but great boxing IQ and great skills.
Kurt, you mentioned, that concluding shot that Figueroa landed on Nery. It looked like it was kind of like an uppercut to the chest body area. It didn't look that impactful on just seeing it on with the zoomed in shot on TV and everything. But like you mentioned, it was probably just one of those that just hit in the sweet spot, maybe the rib cage, and he really felt it. So I thought that was very interesting. Those punches, at least to me as a boxing fan, always are extremely interesting to me, because we're as fans, we're so used to seeing these big shots, these looping shots to the body, hooks to the temple, these massive shots. But it's these ones that kind of, they kind of just go over your head, and you're just like, what just happened? Yeah, I thought that was interesting how you brought that up, and it hit a sweet spot. It seemed like it was like the rib cage, and then it was also like a delayed reaction. So I think he didn't feel it, and then it just kind of popped in there, and he's like, "Oh, forget it," and he went down, and he just never got back up.
Yeah, it was interesting because, like you said, I mean, usually with body shots, it's usually a shot to the liver that's a sweet spot that gets people out. And like you said, when it's a body shot anywhere else, like when Rosario got knocked out by Charlo, and the way he reacted, you're just like, what was that? What did Charlo hit that makes you react like that to go into convulsions? So, I mean, it was interesting. As Nery was walking back to the locker room, someone came up to talk to him, and they literally hit him, like slapped him on the same spot. And you could see him immediately go, and grab it. Yeah. So it makes me think something got, like, it's a broken rib or a severely bruised rib. Because they said he started turning pale and it was probably having a tough time breathing. Whatever Brandon hit, he really genuinely hurt Nery, because it wasn't like, with a liver shot, you kind of recover after a while and you're okay. Nery never seemed okay. Like going back to the locker room, even sitting down, he looked really uncomfortable. So makes me think there was a cracked rib. But, it just shows you, I mean, it's funny, you look at Brandon, he's huge for 122. And you mentioned that draw he fought. Wasn't that fight like the guy came in like 4 pounds heavier? That was literally like a featherweight fight, And at featherweight, he didn't quite carry the power and the menace and the size advantage that he has at 22. And I think you saw that with Nery too. Like at 118, he was a huge 118, and he was a monster there. Since he's come up to 22, he seemed to, not be so much of a monster. Still a very good fighter, but he doesn't have that scary power anymore. Guys can take his shot a little better, even though it's just 4 pounds. So, and this was proof of that, because I mean, I don't think many people really thought. I mean, people were thinking that Nery was really, kind of
the boogeyman,
a low key pound for pound type guy. Mm-hmm. And Brandon was just kind of a swarmer and a guy who just wins on conditioning and swarming and hadn't really fought anybody. So for him to come up with this big knockout, but not only that, to hang with Nery going into that knockout, I think, his stock goes way up.
Right. Yeah. It definitely wasn't a Ivan Redcatch Regis Prograis situation. I think we could definitely say that. And, I'm sure we'll touch on that later. But Ivan Redcatch is challenging that decision in Georgia, and I don't know. I'm really interested to see how that turns out. But also, exactly. Also on this card, Danny Roman gets a 10-round unanimous decision win over Ricardo Espinoza, another super bantamweight matchup. Kurt, is this, are they hoping? Is PBC now hoping to put Roman and Figueroa up against each other?
Well, obviously, the plan is for a unification with Fulton, but right. Again, PBC just has all these pieces, so they can make great fights. Because they've also got Aleem, who looked like $1 million in his last fight, right? So they've got some great pieces and great fights to make. Danny Roman is just always a pleasure to watch. He's like one of those guys who. I remember Max Kellerman describing Jimmy Key, this pitcher for the Yankees. Maybe not the best pitcher in the majors, but the way his form and the way he threw a baseball, it's how you picture it. It's how you imagine a pitcher is supposed to look.
A textbook. Right.
And that's Roman, the hands up, bobbing, weaving, just the combinations he throws. He just seems so disciplined and just such a pleasure to watch. He's always in exciting fights. And another guy who was a diamond in the rough, like when Thompson Boxing had him, he had a couple losses early in his career. Everyone wrote him off. And, quietly he, not only became a world champion, but a unified world champion, and lost to a very hyped Olympian on a split decision that really could have went either way. So Roman is definitely a guy who's no easy night for anybody and can beat anybody in that division. So he's definitely still a major player at 22. So yeah, I'll be interested to see what they do with him next as he waits on Figueroa and Fulton. But I don't think there's any question PBC kind of has him in the wings to fight the winner of that one, because that's another great fight. It's another great fight they can make.
Mike, what'd you think about Roman's unanimous decision win?
I thought it was a great performance from him. I thought he looked a little bit more aggressive than normal. Seemed like he was walking Franco down, and that uppercut was just money for him all night. Franco just couldn't see that coming for some reason. I kind of thought he was going to stop him early on, because he was just getting through with that uppercut, and I thought one of these times Franco's just going to eat one and go down. And like Kurt touched on, great division at the minute. It's really on fire. It just depends what they're going to do with Danny Roman, because he's never been matched easily, and so they'll probably stick him back in with MJ or some other big name. But yeah, he always does really, really well, and I'm surprised that we haven't seen the MJ rematch. Great fight, close decision. I don't know why they didn't run it back straight away. Maybe COVID came and it kind of got lost in their minds. But yeah, I'd like to see that matchup.
Yeah, you mentioned never been matched easily for Roman. Ring City has some pretty even matchups, so we kind of got to give credit to Kurt and the team over there, because you guys put on some pretty. Obviously, you guys have put on some pretty exciting matchups since the start of that whole series.
Well, listen, I mean, that's we're competing against the big boys with like a fraction of the budget, so it's like it's a crowded boxing landscape. So you kind of have to carve out your niche. And for us, I mean, we have a really good team, Sam Kakowski, Evan Rakowski, and myself. And we have a couple other people, working on the team and helping us out as well. Ryan Scalia, who's another boxing brain. So we work really hard to put together tough matches. And yeah, I appreciate, I think it was Corey Erdman who gave us a shout out in his article on Boxing Scene, because that was a really great Showtime card. All three of those fights were competitive fights. And again, that arena in Carson was at Dignity Health now. It's just, it just breeds great fights. People come there, they know they have to put out and perform. And that's what we're trying to build with Ring City. Like when you come on Ring City, you've got to fight. You've got to put it out. It's got to be a good fight. So yeah, I mean, it's we've got the shoestring budget, and we're doing the best we can. Bringing boxing during the week back, and it's been a pleasure. It's been fun. I mean, COVID has wreaked havoc on our cards. Our cards would have been, if the original fights had gone through for every card, I mean, we would have had even better cards. It's been really tough, but I think we've done all right, man. I think we've done all right.
What's the motto that's on the ropes in the ring? Is it any time, any place, anywhere?
Yes. That's it. That's the idea. It's like, these, it's a proving ground. It's guys, there's no babying. You got to come ready to fight. So, and we've had some great cards. So pretty proud of it, Pretty proud of it.
Absolutely. Moving on into Mike's favorite fight of the weekend from the box gym in the country of Germany. Manuel Char returns from a 4-year absence from the ring with a second round KO over Christopher One-Shot Lovejoy, who was actually on the show last week. Mike interviewed Lovejoy last week in a bonus episode here for the last round, Kurt. And he had mentioned that Don King, because his issues with Don King over the last year or so have already been publicized. He's been publicizing it, saying he has contract issues, and Don King was trying to block his fights and this and that. He had told us that Don King wanted $15,000 to let him out of his contract. Lovejoy was only able to come up with about $7,000 or $8,000, a little bit less than half. And Don King didn't. He rejected that offer. So an attorney, one of Lovejoy's attorney or an attorney that he had consulted with, advised him to file for bankruptcy, and that would void the contract. Is that common? I mean, like, is there ever any bankruptcy language in these types of contracts where, it says like, hey, you can't come even if you file for bankruptcy, this is still enforceable?
Well, I mean, you couldn't put that in there because, the bankruptcy court is going to wipe away, one of those personal services contracts. Yes, it's very common that it used to be a lot more common that boxers would file for bankruptcy and get out of promotional agreements. Happened a lot to Don. There's a lot of fighters who filed bankruptcy to get out of contracts with Don because, they didn't get him any fights. It's just kind of a sad situation with Don. I mean, Don used to be obviously one of the top promoters in the sport. And I don't know what he's doing now. I don't even know why he's signing fighters because he's not doing any shows. He's not doing any shows, and he's not even a very good booking agent. His guys just don't work. I mean, poor Vanos is out there like hawking belts on the internet. So, it's definitely fairly common. I wouldn't say fairly commonplace, but it's not unusual that fighters would file for bankruptcy to get out of a contract. Well, they file for bankruptcy because they're financially, in dire straits. But it does have the effect of getting them out of the contract. So it's not surprising that he did that.
Mike, do you think, obviously it's a question for Kerr as well, but do you think that, because Lovejoy, obviously this is the first loss of his career. He was riding on the whole hype behind 19-0, 19 knockouts, even though a lot of his fights were in TJ and Mexico and everywhere else. Mike, do you think
scared to fight him?
Yeah, exactly.
That's why you had to go to TJ.
Exactly. Do you think that that Lovejoy just knows like that he's got attention from boxing fans and boxing media, and he and he's just kind of going with it. He's like, oh well, I know what I am, and I'm just going to take advantage of this, see if I can get some paydays out of it.
That's exactly what it is. He obviously just built his resume up in Mexico, and he was just going to sell it to the highest bidder, and he did that against Manuel Cha, got around 200K. He keeps quoting, so he's well known obviously in the UK because he was going to fight Dave Allen, and obviously Don King drama happened during fight camp. So I'm sure he'll go over there, he'll fight Dave Allen, Fabio Wardley, somebody like that, get another payday, and then it's probably kind of the last we'll see of him. But he's kind of scammed us all. He's what he got out of the business for his actual skills. He's probably done okay. Right.
Kurt, going back to in comparison to the whole Ring City matchups that you guys have put on since the beginning, obviously you guys have a choice of limited opponents. There's certain opponents you guys can't use, especially if they're signed to exclusive contracts with promoters and stuff like that. How does the team at Ring City, especially now with the attention that you guys have been getting in terms of these even matchups, these exciting matchups that boxing fans have been talking about, how do you guys kind of shy away or try to fight against opponents that might be like a Lovejoy, who might have a record outside of the United States or outside of serious boxing areas or regions that are trying to just get on TV for a payday? Like, how do you guys vet that process?
Well, I mean, we have, like I said, we have a team that kind of is the quality control for the broadcast, and we're all boxing guys, so we know, who, we do our due diligence, and we try and make the best matchups that we can. So, with someone like Lovejoy, I mean, it's pretty much all of his fights were in Mexico. Did he fight anyone with a winning record? It's like a guy like that. Yeah, you're going to be very wary of using him, or if you're going to use him, you put him in with somebody who's of comparable, puffed up record, and maybe not put that one on TV, put that one on the undercard, but and see if those guys can fight their way onto Ring City. But yeah, I mean, listen, we have a boxing team that we put a list of fighters in weight divisions, and we're willing to work with any promoter in the game. You know, I mean, we pretty much reached out to everybody. You know, it's not, you know, I mean, you know, just because, you know, someone has a TV deal or what have you, doesn't mean that they're not willing to work with us either. So, I mean, you know, we've definitely tried to reach out to everyone and, you know, to try and make the best fights that we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But we'll see what Lovejoy, where his pathway takes him next, you know, because he's obviously still going, still blowing the horn.
I mean, it's just such a disappointment. Like the WBA is just such a disappointment, man. I mean, they're the oldest sanctioning body in the game. You know, they grew out of the National Boxing Association, which was, you know, initially like a conglomeration, more like the ABC is now, the Association of Boxing Commissions. It was an association of U.S. boxing commissions that were concerned with the influence that the New York Commission had. So they tried to bring some rules to the sport and have champions fight top contenders. And, you know, it started off for the most part with the best of intentions. And to see where they are now, you know, with like 4 or 5 champions and just guys who are fighting for world titles that just, you know, have no business fighting for them. It really drags the sport a little bit. You know, it's really disappointing to see. Absolutely disappointing.
Right.
That fight in particular.
Right.
Well, not only that one, the Stavern fight too that Don put on.
Oh yeah.
Against Trevor Bryan.
Yeah, Trevor. I mean, Trevor Bryan. You know, we don't know. Maybe, you know, at one point in time he could have been a prospect and a really good fighter, but he signed with Don, so he never fights. You know, came in with a spare tire around his waist for Stavern. You know, it's and you know, and he's just not even in the picture, it seems, for any big fights. And he's an undefeated American heavyweight. You know, which you think would be a big effing deal, right?
Right.
But he's it's like he's operating outside of the system. You know? It's just a damn shame. But yeah, I mean, is he a heavyweight champion? Come on, man.
Right. Exactly. But we should be used to it. It's boxing. This happens all the time. So, yeah.
Brutal.
But moving on, for also this past weekend from the Manchester Arena in Manchester, England on DAZN, Joshua Buatsi remains undefeated with the second round TKO over Daniel Buatsi-Dos Santos. This was for the WBA International Light Heavyweight title. Mike, what'd you think about this matchup?
Funny that we just touched on matchmaking before we mentioned this fight. I know obviously it wasn't supposed to headline. It should have been Terry Harper in there in a unification against Choi. Obviously that dropped off with a hand injury. They ended up making Buatsi, because he's an up and coming, you know, face of Matchroom against Dos Santos, but very poor matchmaking. I think he was something like the 5th or best light heavyweight in France. So he wasn't even the best out of his country. That's not really a big boxing nation. So I understand he had a hard fight against Kalic in the last fight, had a couple of injuries, change of trainer to Virgil Hunter. But did he learn anything with the pedigree that he already had coming out of the amateurs? Did he learn anything? It was just really 2 rounds wasted. It was just, you could see early on that the guy didn't really have a clue. And, you know, some of the fundamentals, the basics he wasn't very good at. And you could just kind of watch, like, okay, like, you know, Buatsi's going to take him out sooner or later. And then he just got him cornered and took him out. And luckily the referee, you know, just waved it off because it was just a waste of time. The whole card really wasn't that great. There's a couple of like English, British level fights that were, you know, well matched. But the bigger names like your Buatsis, who should have been in bigger, harder fights, yeah, it was just a walkover for him.
What do you think about Joshua Buatsi, Kurt?
I mean, I think he's a great prospect. You know, I mean, he, you know, if anything, he did show that he's got that one punch power in this fight. And I agree, it was not the most competitive matchup. But listen, injuries happen. Believe me, we know on Ring City. We had a very, a heavyweight fight that everyone was looking forward to on our last show. That at the week of the fight, you had to come up with another main event. But you know, Buatsi and I think Michael, you know, was spot on. I mean, you know, he had a hard fight in his last fight. This was supposed to be just kind of a stay busy fight. ended up being the main event. I think he did what he was supposed to do. How does he match up with guys like Bivol and all that? I mean, it'll be interesting. He's not that far away, certainly from fighting a guy like Joe Smith, I think Eddie would probably put him in there with Joe Smith right now, I wouldn't blame him for doing it. I think he's a kid who's definitely, he's got potential to be a champion in that division. So he's exciting to watch. Definitely exciting to watch.
Absolutely. Also on that card, Lerone Richards remains undefeated as well with the 12-round unanimous decision win over Giovanni De Carolis. Hopefully I said that right. That was for the vacant EBU super middleweight title. These titles just don't stop, do they? And then Tommy McCarthy gets a 6-round KO over Alexander Jur. And then Jason Cunningham gets his 12-round unanimous decision win over Gamal Yafai.
Performance of the weekend, that.
What'd you think about that?
Cunningham was going to retire. He was like, you know what? This is my last fight. Going in against Gamal Yafai, obviously the Yafai brothers, 18-1, huge underdog. Just went in there, and maybe the fact that he thought to himself, this is my last fight, he kind of went in with, no airs and graces about what was going to happen. If he lost, he lost. If he won, he won. And maybe just not having put that pressure on himself. Unbelievable performance. Dropped him several times, looked amazing. And, now he's got himself at least another payday. So, great performance. And kind of sad that it didn't really hit the headlines too much that, somebody, that much of an underdog over in the UK turns it around with that one fight. But yeah, great performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he did. Like you said, he definitely earned himself another payday following that win. Moving on, fight previews to one of the most anticipated fights of the year, especially in recent memory. From this upcoming Saturday, the 22nd of May, from the Virgin Hotels in Las Vegas on ESPN for the WBC, WBA, IBF, and WBO and Ring Magazine super lightweight titles, 140 pounds. Josh Taylor, 17-0, goes up against Jose Ramirez, 26-0. What do you think about this matchup, Kurt?
I love it. I absolutely love it. I was bummed that Top Rank kept Ramirez out of the World Boxing Super Series because I thought he should have been in that. But as it turns out, it was a master stroke of business anyway. Because they got that massive payday to fight Hooker on DAZN, and Ramirez has been kind of a staple on ESPN since then. But in terms of the matchup, it's a great matchup. Josh Taylor's got great, amateur pedigree and grinded through that World Boxing Super Series, pulled like a little minor upset maybe over Prograis. I think Prograis was seeded number 1. Although most people thought that was a real pick'em fight, between Taylor and Prograis. And full disclosure, I represented DeBella in litigation against the World Boxing Super Series. I might have, try to get that fight to happen a little sooner, because they were breaching the contract. But yeah, Taylor's really talented fighter, a lot of grit. But Ramirez for me is really hard to root against Ramirez either because he's a kid who's fighting for his community and nothing's been given. Even though he was an Olympian, he didn't have a huge spotlight and people didn't expect him to get as far as he's gotten, and he just keeps winning when people don't expect him to win. And he's obviously got a very exciting style too, very aggressive, great body puncher. I can't wait for this fight. It should be an excellent fight. I think most people are kind of tipping Josh Taylor, but geez, listen, people tip Taylor over Prograis because he kind of had home ring advantage over in the UK. Well, the fight's here in the States for Ramirez, so it's for him to defend his home and see if he can get the decision. But I think it's gonna be a great fight. Really looking forward to it.
What do you think, Mike?
I think it's going to be a great fight. Like Kirk said, both of them have done really well to get to where they are. I think we were both, some of the people that thought that, Ramirez was a little bit protected because he was bringing those big crowds up in Fresno. Somebody that's on this card, I actually had beaten him. I thought Jose Zepeda, I actually thought beat him, but I thought he got the hometown decision. That's a different story for another day. I have Taylor winning it, honestly. I think Jose Ramirez may be a little bit, excuse the pun, tailor-made for him. Because at spots, I think that Jose likes to stand and trade, and so does Josh. But I just think that Josh may be a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, a little bit more aggressive. And I also think that he's just good in every range, Josh, because of his amateur pedigree. I think he's good on the outside, middle distance, and he's also really good up close. But he does get drawn into fights. Was it Baranchek he fought in the World Boxing Super Series where he'd schooled him, and then he just got to the 12th round and decided, you know what, I'm just going to stand and trade with him. He didn't need to, but I think it was in Scotland, and he just did it for the crowd. And hopefully he doesn't do that against Ramirez. He's a little bit more structured, which I think he will be, having Ben Davidson in his corner, who just unbelievable game plans that Ben Davidson seems to do. If you ever get a chance to see him on those, the BT previews and breakdowns that he does, he's just very analytical and just great at building a game plan. So, yeah, I think Taylor. I think a late stoppage.
Stoppage, huh?
Yeah. I think Jose Ramirez will get kind of tired towards the end. I think they'll stand and trade, and I think Taylor will catch him.
I think this is, like you guys have mentioned, both of you or I think Mike mentioned Taylor. I think I've seen Taylor being picked as the slight favorite. Some of them, as a bigger favorite, but as the favorite in general, more often than Ramirez. But I think this is like we keep saying, it's a great fight. It's a great matchup between two undefeated fighters. They both have multiple pieces of the 140-pound crown. I keep changing my mind. We've talked about this on the past episode the last couple of weeks. I keep thinking one day I think Taylor, and then one day I think Ramirez. As of today, when we're recording this episode this week, I'm leaning towards Ramirez just because of I think the X factor for him is training out of that Garcia Boxing Academy. I mean, just the sparring and the work that he gets in there, it's like it's iron sharpens iron there, and I think that's a very, very big deal. It's not to say that Taylor, obviously doesn't have a lot of will to win and still might win and this Saturday, but I don't know. Like I said, I keep switching as the days go by, and as of today, I think Ramirez is going to take it just because of the sparring and the work that he gets in that gym in Riverside, California. I mean, Kurt, am I wrong? Am I wrong with that line of thinking for this fight, or what do you think?
Well, I think you're right to say that. I mean, Robert's gym is just loaded with talent. I mean, there's just so many great guys in there to spar with. I know he does a lot of work with Virgil Ortiz, and that can't be easy sparring. With Ramirez, Michael touched upon it. He can be outboxed. That's the thing. I mean, I actually thought Postal beat him. I had him winning by a point. Styles make fights, but then you can look at it and say, hey, Baranchik, if besides the knockdowns, that fight was like a 7-5 fight. That was a really close fight. And you'd think that Ramirez is a little more talented and a little more fundamental than Baranchik. So there's a lot of ways to look at the fight. Ramirez will definitely be sharp. He will be ready. He will be motivated. But Taylor's just one of these guys. He reminds me a little bit of like Kobe Bryant. I mean, he just has that he'll win at all costs. Like he just doesn't give a fuck. Like he's just got that mean streak in him, where like he's got that like mentality, that Mamba mentality, where he just will not lose. He's just like really, really just a next level mentally. It's just strictly looking, if this was on neutral ground, I'm picking Taylor. In Vegas, though, Vegas against, a Mexican-American fighter, I mean, it's if it's close, it's going to be really interesting to see how it turns out. I mean, Taylor is going to want to win decisively in this fight. If he doesn't, don't be surprised if Ramirez gets a decision.
Right. No, absolutely. Do you think that Taylor? Do you think that Taylor, this fight could have been in the UK if it wasn't for the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, I think him signing with Top Rank, though. I mean, Top Rank doesn't do a lot of shows in England. I think once he signed with Top Rank, it was kind of a fait accompli that any fight with Ramirez was going to be in States. So, yeah, and they've done so much. I mean, Top Rank is based in Vegas, so it makes all the sense in the world for it to be in Vegas. Yeah, it'll be interesting, seeing who the judges are. If I'm Taylor's camp, I'm paying really close attention to who the judges are for this fight. And if I don't like one of them, I'm objecting. Like hell.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely going to be an excellent fight. Like, as we touched on at the top of the show, it's unfortunate that this whole Fury Wilder Joshua news, or Fury Wilder in a sense, has kind of taken the attention away from that fight. But we still have a couple days left until Saturday, so hopefully they get a little bit more attention on it. But I don't understand why these guys weren't, and they might have been. I just haven't seen it. But why? I don't have these guys. Has Taylor or Ramirez been on ESPN or First Take or anything? Am I wrong, or have you guys seen anything like that in terms of promotion?
I think that's been the big complaint, is that for a fight, this is how boxing's supposed to work. The best is supposed to fight the best. I mean, certainly anyone who listened to my podcast must have heard that phrase about a zillion times. The best need to fight the best. We've got the best fighting the best here at 140. This should be, and it's on ESPN. And I mean, they should be hyping the living crap out of this. And yeah, I mean, I think now that it's fight week, they'll probably kick it into high gear, but I think it's been pretty quiet, a little too quiet for a fight of this magnitude so far. But, I think they will try and kick it into high gear once the fighters are in Vegas and in the States, and, they'll be available. I'm sure Max will do something on his program and probably have them on First Take. But yeah, they haven't done it yet.
Kind of off subject a little bit, but do you think that, doing all that promotion does drive in that many extra views? Because like we touched on earlier about the Wilder Fury 2, they went all out for that. They were, was it the Super Bowl and stuff like that? And you had ESPN, guesstimating, it's going to do 2.5 million views. And it did 750,000, 800,000.
Well, I think the one thing they didn't do, I think, usually, there's a lot of kind of advertising by the actual pay-per-view provider or in and around that. And that's the one thing they didn't spend any money on. And I think they regret that decision, because they might have left some buys on the table. But I mean, I think it definitely helps. I mean, Teofimo Lopez is now a star because, ESPN or Lomachenko, they made Lomachenko into a star because they hyped him, because you saw him on ESPN all the time, and they hyped his abilities and so on. I think maybe a little bit of the problem is Josh Taylor really hasn't fought here in the States, so there's not a lot of hype around him here, as good a fighter as he is, having won the World Boxing Super Series. And, Ramirez is not one of the top guys in the Top Rank stable. I mean, he's a guy who main events, but, they've definitely spent a lot more time on Lomachenko and Tyson Fury and, Bud Crawford. I mean, he's kind of down the list. So, but for this fight, I think they should have, started the hype machine a little sooner. But we'll see. Maybe you're right. Maybe it wouldn't have made a difference, but we'll see.
Now, Kurt, does the winner of this Saturday's matchup between Taylor and Ramirez, once they unify, is it expected that they go up to 147 and fight a Bud Crawford, since Bud Crawford needs an opponent?
I mean, I think so. I mean, the spanner in that works, obviously, is that, it's been reported that Crawford's contract is going to be up pretty soon with Top Rank. So, I mean, I've definitely heard both guys talk about it. They feel like once they unify the belts, they'd like to step up and fight Crawford in a really big fight. I think both Ramirez and Taylor are game for that. But the question is, Top Rank is obviously not on great terms with Bud either. And there's been no announcement of an opponent. So maybe they're planning to put these guys in there with them afterwards. But, obviously it's a very viable fight, but it's really going to depend on what the relationship between Top Rank and Crawford is and if they're going to go forward together.
Or do we see Teofimo Lopez step up to 140?
I'd love to see that. But then again, there's another fighter who's on bad terms with Top Rank now for supposedly engineering the purse bid, the Triller one. But I mean, obviously as a boxing fan, everyone would love to see that fight. And it makes sense for all involved. I mean, Teofimo has a hell of a time making 135. And, against either Taylor or Ramirez, that's a great fight at 140. They're all signed to Top Rank. Supposedly that should be easy to make, but things are a little complicated. So we'll see.
Right. Also on this card, Jose Chonzapera, 33-2, goes up against Hank Lundy for the WBC Silver Super Lightweight title. As Mike touched on earlier, he believes that Zepeda edged out Ramirez in Fresno, but Ramirez got the hometown decision. That was a very exciting fight, though. It was very competitive. What do you think about this matchup, Mike?
It's funny, we touched on matchmaking. So Hank Lundy ended up stepping in because the Nevada State Athletic Commission wouldn't approve Mexico's Pedro Campa, who was 32-1-1. I haven't checked the record, but I'm assuming it must have been severely padded because 32-1-1 is, it's a decent record, isn't it, to fight somebody like Jose Zepeda? So, but obviously, the Nevada State Athletic Commission were famous for not approving Jaime Munguia against Triple G.
Right. Kurt, have you guys had an issue in the short time that Ring City's been around? Have you guys had an issue with a commission rejecting an opponent for fights yet?
Not at all. Not at all, because, I mean, honestly, with this one, it's a little befuddling. I mean, Campa's not that bad. I mean, he's a decent fighter. I mean, I don't know if Bob Bennett looked at tapes of him or maybe someone got in his ear. I don't know, but I didn't think that was a bad fight. I'm surprised. I mean, Lundy's past it. I mean, I don't know that
he's definitely a veteran. Yeah.
He's 37 years old. I mean, and he's lost like 2 of his last 4 fights. I mean, I get Campa hasn't fought like, Superman, but he's an aggressive fighter, fairly, pretty exciting fighter. I thought he was going to fight Broner too. Wasn't he scheduled to fight Broner and then he got COVID? It's a little befuddling. But it's interesting, like, Michael had said about Buatsi and matchmaking and, coming off of a tough fight. They put him in a little easy. I mean, that's probably what's going on here with Zepeda. I mean, they're not going to put him in there with another monster after that fight with Baranchik, which was just an absolute beast of a fight. So I understand, why it's either a Lundy or a Campa for a guy who's clearly, near the top of the 140-pound class. But, is it a great TV fight? Is Top Rank doing a service to the fans with this one? I mean, it's tough. Their mission is different than Ring City. They are tied to Top Rank and Top Rank's fighters, and it's a balancing act where you're protecting the home fighters, but you want to make entertaining fights. So it's not easy. I am loath to criticize the matchmaking of any of these entities. Now, knowing how tough it is, it's very, very difficult to make good fights. So, if Hank Lundy on last minute notice was like the best guy they could get, then that's the best guy they could get. With Bob Bennett refusing Campa, which is just, to me, is a head scratcher. The difference between Lundy and Campa, I don't know that there's. I would pick Campa over Lundy, to be honest with you, if I was a commissioner. I think, he's a fresher fighter, be a more exciting fight. You've got to, he comes to fight, he's a pressure fighter. So, Yeah, man, it's a bit of a head scratcher. I mean, Lundy's obviously crafty, but I mean, how much does he have left? You know, I mean, he's been around the block a few times.
Kurt, being a boxing jack of all trades, after that performance from Zepeda against Baranchek, you know, those highlights went around the world. And obviously, you know, Zepeda isn't the biggest name. Are you kind of surprised that they've kind of brought him back in with, you know, maybe an easy touch? You know, Lundy could stink the place out with his, you know, just old man him, you know, with his high boxing IQ. You know, if I was in Zepeda's camp, I would have, you know, strike while the iron's hot. Get him in there with a big name, big payday, some kind of belt, some kind of WBA trinket. Are you kind of surprised he's in there with someone like a lower level fighter?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little disappointing, right? Because he has momentum. I mean, that was clearly the fight of the year. It might have been the fight of the decade. You know, I mean, that's about as good a fight, just back and forth, rock'em sock'em robots, as I've seen in maybe ever. You know, it's an unbelievable fight. But you know, but like the point that you made previously, though, you know, Zepeda suffered some damage in that fight. So bringing him back in a tough fight, you know, you might not want to do that. And maybe it was his management made the call, like, no, we don't want a marquee fight. Like just kind of a stay busy fight against a decent, you know, opponent, not a total, scrub, but like get us somebody we know he can handle and he's not going to get too much back from. So yeah, I mean, it's a balancing act. You don't know how much is management. And you know, I thought, you know, Brad Goodman or whoever made the match with Campo, that was perfect because, you know, Campa's an aggressive fighter who's would probably be able to handle, but it would be an entertaining fight. I thought they got it right with that. You know, then being forced to scramble, you got to do what you got to do, you know. But yeah, I think with Zepeda, either management or Top Rank, it was just kind of like, you know, it's funny because Carl Moretti, he's not the matchmaker there. He has more of an administrative position at Top Rank now. But when he was matchmaker at main events, and I had fighters with him, he had a philosophy that he got from Teddy Brenner, the old matchmaker at the Garden and matchmaker for Top Rank as well, where you go tough fight, easy fight, tough fight, easy fight. So with this one, I mean, Zepeda, it doesn't get much tougher than the Baranchik fight. So it's not surprising that they brought him down a peg for the next fight. So I can't fault Top Rank or Zepeda's management. But again, I thought they got it right with Campo. That was really a good piece of matchmaking all around. But can't believe Nevada chose Lundy over Campo.
We got to get Bob. We got to get Bob Bennett on here, Mike. Bob Bennett's actually said he'd come on the show. So he told us, I think, sometime last year or something. So we just haven't followed up, but we need to follow up with that because he'd be interesting to talk to. Because we've talked to Andy Foster of the California Commission. So
a couple of times. Andy's been on a couple of times.
Yeah, he's been on 2 or 3 times with us. But Bob Bennett, just because of situations like this, you know, rejecting Jaime Munguia for Triple G or Campa for Zepeda just this weekend, you know, it'd be interesting to see what his thought process is behind those decisions. But rounding off this card, Elvis Rodriguez, the Freddie Roach trained Elvis Rodriguez, goes up against Kenneth Sims Jr. Is he related to Anthony Sims Jr., Mike?
Great question. Kurt, do you know?
Well, I would assume if you have an Anthony Sims Jr. and a Kenneth Sims Jr., they can't both be the juniors of the same dad with different names. So I would assume
unless they have different moms,
not brothers.
That's true.
Right.
Could be cousins. I don't know, but I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
That's true, though. That's true. That's why he's a lawyer. That's why he's a lawyer. Yeah. But what do you think about Elvis Rodriguez? And you know, he's trained by Freddie Roach. He's gotten some pretty decent attention in the boxing world. And you know, it seems like he's pretty talented and could make some noise in his division. What do you think about him?
Is that to me?
Yes. Sorry.
Listen, you know, he's obviously got some great tools. I mean, you know, he took on Cameron Crail, who's a very durable veteran, you know, very tough guy, and just, you know, walked right through him in 3 rounds. You know, his last fight, he went the distance, so, he proved he's human a little bit. But, you know, with these prospects, you know, it's so hard to tell until they really step up and face, you know, top 20, top 15 opposition. that's really trying to win and isn't just intimidated. But I mean, he's very exciting as a prospect. He's obviously got some great tools, and you don't have a much better. You can't find any better trainer than Freddie Roach, especially for an aggressive left-hander. Freddie has a little bit of experience with aggressive left-handers who can punch.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, he's a guy. Top Rank has some great fighters, and he's like another guy who, like Berlanga. You get excited before his fights. Something special could happen.
Absolutely. Well, as we round off the episode here, we appreciate you coming on, Kurt, and joining us. Especially kind of giving us your take on the whole Wilder Fury situation, and kind of giving your legal opinion from what we know, at least. Obviously right. we don't have intimate knowledge of the details of these contracts, but just we've been seeing in reports. But it is big news. A lot of people are interested in that news, and it just came out of nowhere. People thought Fury Joshua was happening, and then a monkey wrench gets thrown into there, and Wilder pops back up out of the shadows like that. But before we let you go, Kurt, go ahead and let the people know where they can find you on Twitter, on Instagram, and obviously the next Ring City USA event, if you can announce it.
Well, on Twitter, just look up boxing_Esquire. That was my former podcast, the Boxing Esquire podcast, which I'm no longer doing. But that's my handle on Twitter, and that's pretty much where to find me. I mean, I'm on Facebook, but I don't really check it that much. And same with Instagram. I've kind of stepped off of social media a little bit now that I'm with Ring City. I have to do business with everybody, man. I can't be so outspoken with opinions. So yeah. But that's pretty much, if you want to send me a shout out, that's where it is. Like Ring City right now, NBC has the Olympics and the NHL playoffs and all that coming up. So our dates are a little bit up in the air, and we're talking to them about where we can fit in. So probably sometime, late summer or in the fall, we'll start back up again and get rolling with a bunch of fights in a row. But yeah, that's pretty much where we are with Ring City.
Is it an exclusive partnership with NBC? You wouldn't be able to go to another network or another platform?
I mean, right now, yeah, we have a deal with NBC. So, obviously the network that we're on is not going to be in service at the end of the year. There's going to be no more NBC Sports Network. So yeah, we're talking about to NBC. I mean, they're very happy with what we've done. So we're talking with them, just trying to figure out what we're going to do in the future as far as future dates and what's going on. So, but yeah, I mean, it's been great. It's been great so far.
Awesome. Well, we definitely ourselves and our listeners are definitely looking forward to more Ring City shows, especially with the matchups you guys have been putting on. They're obviously exciting, especially to the hardcore fans. Because our audience are hardcore boxing fans, so they definitely appreciate it. But as we cross the finish line here for this week's episode, Mike, go ahead and let our fans and our listeners know where they can find us and follow us.
We're at The Last Round 12 on Instagram and Twitter. And obviously join us next week. We'll be reviewing Josh Taylor's win over Jose Ramirez and then looking forward to Devin Haney against Linares, and one that's flown under the radar, Ubali against Nonito Donaire is on the 29th.
Yeah, I'm a big Donaire fan, man. I've been a Donaire fan for a long time, so I'm looking forward to that one. So for our guest of the week and sports and entertainment attorney, Kurt Emhoff, and of Ring City USA's team. For my co-host, Michael Shepard, I'm Danny Z. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round Podcast.